So that was an incredibly collaborative hug I saw when you guys came on the stage. There seems to be this conception that you work in a less collaborative framework, as if VR is a precursor or AR is a holding pattern, and of course everyone is holding out for what happens next. Where are we in that spectrum, and can you tell us about how you have been working together and how you expect the spectrum to play out?
It's interesting, actually. We don't really make any difference between any of these mediums, because for us it all comes from the same source. So the fact that we at Acute don't have any AR is because technology is not really practically there, as we can see. Like it's still a little bit to go before we can start deploying it, but we are certainly going to take this technology with both hands. My belief is that in the future, AR is going to be more useful for day-to-day life when we can replace our phone headsets and look a little bit through AR glasses and be able to connect with the internet maybe through that, and rather than for entertainment. And VR is going to be something that's going to allow us to go into spaces we haven't been before, or go somewhere, to be able to do, like to switch off from the reality. So this is, I think, how these two technologies is going to kind of develop and evolve.
I think for me, fistfights between different mediums make for great headlines. So people obviously adore the idea that people making VR would loathe people making XR and vice versa. And to me, it's just not practical or productive. I admire Dado and his team and their work, along with a lot of other people that are focused on VR. But for us, we see the process as totally collaborative. So, for example, in order to finish the St. Vincent piece, we have to develop a massive suite of tools that have never existed before, because people have only ever thought of stories and performances, at least recorded ones, in a flat plane. Everything's being seen through a screen. And so we have to work on 3 axes in a way that people can relate to the captures as if they're in the room with you. So that means all of the tools that we're making apply to absolutely any medium that uses dimension meaningfully. And I would say that the tools that people like Dado and his team have created already inform almost everything that we're doing. So there's nothing combative about the team. We are collaborative in every way, just like we are with any of the artists that we're working with.
It's so interesting because you have both started from the areas of big movies and big gaming and big budgets to work in the very commercials field of where these technologies may have started their application in life. I'd love to hear what brought you first to those technologies, but also how you have made this decision to move forward with artists. What does that artist specifically bring to these mixed reality media?
Very good. So the thing is that films are moving in a very, very strict path at the moment. No big studio is prepared to take any risks anymore, and you could see that Disney and Warner Brothers are releasing Jungle Book, and they're both doing Marvel. So we don't really see a lot of creativity happen in that field anymore. It is very, very threaded path. So what really brought me to this technology is because all of my life I was thriving on figuring out new things and figuring out where the world is going to go and how best to embrace the new technology. Now, the reason why I think art is perfectly suited for VR and why it kind of perfectly made sense for us to do it was, number one, artists are people who just do not necessarily follow the rules. And this is exactly what we need right now.
Would you say that of Jeff Koons, Marina Abramovic, and Oliver Eliasson? Do they play to that
Totally.
type? Totally.
So you would get either one of them would say, Dado, we're going that way. But you say, well, hang on, there is nothing that way. They say, no, we're going anyway. And we have to just trust them. They're the captains. And we go and we start going that way. And then suddenly we hit something that we didn't even know it exists, which is obvious because we work with something completely new. It's a new medium. So how would we even know what we're going to discover? So this is really what is very exciting. So we actually have accelerated a lot of things and figure out a lot of things much sooner instead of us having this strict technological approach. Our target is blah, blah, and in 2 years we have to get there. And there was nothing like that. Also, a work for a small unit like Acute Art is incredibly satisfying because you have a very agile team and you can be very agile and change your direction and adapt. And then, most of all, is this kind of collaborative spirit. I think, you know, by us combining our forces with other developers, with people like Todd, and us really growing, you know, this thing together, you know, and that satisfying feeling that we are in this boat together is actually really, really great.
Well, so I produced film, although not big budget. I produced a film here that came out 10 years ago about a guy named Ian Curtis who was in a band called Joy Division. And we had to scratch and claw and barely finished that. That film was called Control. And it was actually through that film that I wound up meeting Roni. But once I saw that we were not constricted by a screen, that the idea of whatever it is that the artist wants to give to an audience was no longer limited by any sort of flat dimension, but was able to be presented in whatever was most appropriate for the experience itself, it fundamentally changed my view of what stories and performance and installation possibly mean. And spent a long time. I was asked to move to Florida to be with Magic Leap and chose not to, which meant that I didn't actually have to work within the politics of the company. I was able to sit around and think around, all right, what is it that the existing mediums do well, and what can be done better? And so you go through that process. You try to basically unravel everything that you think you know. And ultimately, that was how we came to certain, I don't know, ideas or concepts about what it is that we're making right now. And so what I'd say is this process, this time, is one of questioning and figuring out how new mediums can be truly better expressions for artistic vision and how they can not be redundant to what already exists.
So I'd love to pick up on this point of social and emotion, because there is this discussion about this shared social experience. I watched Chris Milk's Life of Us, this idea that there's several of you within this world of within, and how this is opening new social experiences. And so it's interesting as you sometimes look at VR as that isolation cell. We had 25,000 people come through maximum capacity for the Zaha Hadid virtual reality experience, but yet even Inarritu's work, which we can discuss, only enabled 50 people a day to go through LACMA or to go through Fondazione Prada in Milan. So tell me how social you see these technologies as becoming. Is it about the individual? And then what happens as we look to the platforms that enable the AR to pop up a Jeff Koons sculpture in the park on Snapchat, which is what Ben and I were delighted to see in Hyde Park last week.
So actually, you know, interestingly, when the first artist we went to work with was Oliver Elias, and he was very interesting. He said, I want my piece to be everything that VR is going to become, and I don't want it to be like a solitary experience that somebody sits on their own in their room without connecting to other people. And I don't want it to be like something that you just sit and don't move. So we actually, from the word go, when we started the company in the very first piece, we had a task to change the concept of VR completely. So his piece already is actually a social piece. So anybody, anywhere in the world who finds themselves visiting his, you know, rainbow at the same time are going to be able to interact with one another. And that makes this piece so magical. Actually, when you go and experience it over there, we are just like in a breakout area. You won't be able to interact with anybody right now because we're launching like just in November, later on this month. But you know, like once we launch, you're going to be able to enter and see other people represented as a little like sparks of soul that you can then touch and even communicate like you're on Skype with them. And that is absolutely fascinating, you know, to be able to connect with someone, let's say, in Hong Kong. And this is also how we developed the piece with him. I was in London, he in Berlin, and we were like talking to one another in VR for hours. And it's completely different dimension.
So this sounds very emotional. What's the most emotional experience you've had with VR?
My most emotional experience was definitely in Inarritu's piece.
Has anyone seen the Inarritu piece?
Carne and Agnes? No. So it's actually the best part about that piece that it is not at all, you forget that it's VR. You know, he actually did a great job to prepare you for the experience and to be in the experience and to live the experience, and then for you to realize, oh, actually, I had VR glasses on. I mean, it was something that he kind of managed to do so well that to hide the fact that it's not about putting a headset on your face, but it's actually about experiencing something. And because of that, like I felt, emotionally drenched afterwards.
And you think after the Oscar Award win of Alejandro Inarritu for Revenant, where do you go from there? So for you, this was a place that actually enhanced that.
And I'm so glad that they're going to award him again, for this effort.
Is that public? Anyways, we heard it here first.
I don't know, but it is now, I guess.
Fantastic. I guess back to that social. How do you address that, Todd? Is social media making us antisocial? Are mixed realities making reality less social for us all?
I think people like immediacy. It's rewarding. It's the idea of being in a real conversation with somebody and being able to kind of tell if you're doing well or not. And so social media has been able to provide people with immediacy and anonymity, which can be its undoing. I think from an artistic point of view, the Serpentine is actually a great example because you wind up with people and their experiences are actually heightened by who's in the room with you, and the fact that people are reacting positively, negatively, it doesn't matter. They have a sense of, let's say, finite community because they are in a room together, and I think that's fundamental to everything that you guys do. I think with the way we envision everything that we're making, the desire is to provide that sense of community while giving it a sense of its infinite nature. Now, what that means is, okay, so for Annie Clark walking across a stage, and the piece that we'll finally exhibit, probably to begin with here, you have the sense of a person in the room, and that's fundamental to what that experience should be. But that person doesn't degrade. We can show the exhibition, at least initially, to 12 people that are all tethered to the same kind of core computer, but eventually 1,000 people will be able to see that simultaneously. And therefore we are designing, and Annie is designing, for a massive audience, not an isolated one. But the wonderful thing about feeling like somebody's in the room is if you want to relate to it individually, you can. So I think it's the lack of limitations designed with a sense of community that influences absolutely everything that we do.
I thought that was an interesting piece that came out this week in terms of the future in live performances of VR and AR, and actually the fact that it wasn't about sitting at home and watching it, it was sitting up in the nosebleeds but feeling like you're in the front row as well. So maybe there is that sense of democratization that this is making art accessible for us all. The red light has gone, so I have a final question. I guess Einstein said that logic can take us from A to B, maybe science can take us from A to B, but imagination can take us everywhere. And you are really melding those two worlds beautifully. I'd love to ask you what you see in the future, in the best case scenario, as the future of a really forward-thinking museum, as the Serpentine positions itself to be.
I think, that it is very hard for us to understand that, because we live in London and Serpentine is on our doorstep, that actually, this is, we are so used to be able to kind of walk into it and see an exhibition, but we have to kind of see it a little bit bigger picture that, there is 9 billion people living on this planet who have absolutely no access to art. And, like some of them have never experienced an artwork from Oliver or from Marina or from Jeff. And what Serpentine is actually really going to do is going to enable, to be a curator, a digital curator for these people who are going to be able to use internet and download these experiences on their computers, no matter where they are in the world. And so you are going to grow from this little kind of place in a park to kind of probably the biggest gallery if you would like to, and it all depends how interesting and good your shows are, as you said at the beginning. You just just going to get a much bigger outreach.
My chairman, my board, and the Arts Council will be thrilled that we will go from 1.5 million to 8 or 9 billion very soon. So from your mouth.
Well, but why wouldn't you?
Absolutely. I think that's our ambition.
I mean, Hans Ulrich and his dedication to the art of curation. I mean, that's the entire point. I mean, you can even think about the association that people have with artists as, or brands or whatever. I mean, it's basically the idea of curation. So if, for example, like anything that happens in the Hadid space is better for happening there. The fact of that space is because of the curation of the Serpentine. So what you can say is, all right, if you have a limitless artistic community and it is no longer the walls, but it's actually the ideology behind the walls, then we can be anywhere. And this could be the ultimate linking device artistically.
Fantastic. On that note, thank you very much for this collaboration with Wired. Thank you so much, Greg. And thank you to our 2 amazing panelists for helping us bridge our 2 sites and multiple worlds. Thank you.
Thank you.